Hi there, I've put together a bit of a presentation on what I see as the key F5J strategies and tactics. I made this presentation to some friends of mine in South Australia and I was able to record it. So here it is. Enjoy, I hope it's worthwhile. The first part is an overview, and the key strategies for F5J really start with 4 different levels of air reading. And what the actual competition is. So level 1 is, what is the event and how aggressive do I need to be? Level 2 is reading the big picture weather conditions of the day. Level 3 is reading the local weather conditions in the last 30 minutes before you fly. And level 4 is reading the local conditions 5 minutes before launch. And this is really key to finding lift before you have to launch in an F5J event. The better you can read the air, the better you're going to do in the event. Plan A, bringing it all together before the launch. Plan B, the launch strategies and what might change during the launch. And then low-level thermaling and big picture thermaling. So F3K pilots are very good at the low-level thermaling, and F3J pilots are really good at the big picture thermaling. And what I find is F5J combines the best of both events and requires both levels of skill. Preparation, it's the key to letting you concentrate on the air, and I'll expand on that a little bit later. So the first thing you need to do is work out what the event is and how aggressive you need to be. So it's inversely proportional to the length of the event. So if you've got an event where the total number of rounds is, say, 3 to 5, like a fly-off, or an afternoon event, then you need to be super aggressive. When you get between sort of 5 and 7 or 8 rounds of an event, then you need a mix of both. Once you get over sort of a day's flying and you're in a 2-day, 3-day type event, then you really don't need to be aggressive at all. If you go back and have a look at the events in Australia here, Jerilderie, Armidale, Cootamundra, Malang, even the Worlds, you could have launched to 200 metres and still won the event. Preliminaries I'm talking about. So this is a winning tactic that is missed by a lot of pilots. Launch height doesn't mean anything if you can't get the time, and the longer the event, the more that's relevant. Like I said, local events of one day, you're going to have 5 to 7 rounds maybe, then you need to be shifting gears depending on the conditions. So you need to be aggressive in some and you need to be conservative in others. And fly-offs, they're effectively short-term events, 3 to 5 rounds, you need to be super aggressive. Obviously dependent on weather conditions. The second level of air reading that you need to take into account is the big picture weather conditions of the day. What is the air doing throughout the day? Which stage is my next flight in? You need to be watching the previous flights and discuss the conditions with your team. What's the time of the day? How big are the thermal cycles? Sun loads, clouds, field hotspots, wind shifts and temperature. You need to get a feel for what's going on throughout the day and build up that mental picture. Just on the different stages throughout the day, I'll jump on the whiteboard. What you have is, as the day goes on, this is the activity in the air. That it will start off low, get better, and then drop off. But there's a lot of different stages within this curve. In here, this first stage, you might have some inversion layer, you might have some very low lift, and you need to be very, very conservative. During this next phase, you find the air's starting to get some activity and mixing, the inversion layers lifting, and the activity might be good and poor and good and poor. So in this period here, where you can't be confident that the air is going to give you good, reliable thermals, then you need to be conservative. Here, as the day goes on and the lift gets more active, you might have 4 rounds where you're doing really well. what you've got to be careful of is as the day drops off in the afternoon, this period here can be quite volatile as well. And you can see aggressive pilots that have gone, hey, I've been launching to 20, 30 meters here and here and here and here, all of a sudden get unstuck. They might get around where the lift's really quite poor. So these are the two areas that generally catch out most pilots. So you need to be adapting your aggressiveness in your reading of the air as the day changes. And then of course, at the end here, very low lift conditions, back to conservative hang time. And not just in terms of the lift strength, how aggressively you're going to chase the air. It's no good feeling a thermal go through late in the day when it's not going to be very strong. And all you end up going to be doing is running downwind. You won't catch a lot of air. And then you've got a, one of those dreadful flights where you're just coming back through sync the whole way. So it's something to be aware of how the air changes throughout the day. It's very important for determining your aggressive strategy or not. So get that mental picture of the day's thermals, how strong they are, how often they're coming through. Again, in the middle of the day here, you might get some periods of air where the thermals are very close together and the cycle's very short. And then as the afternoon goes on, you might get very long cycle time. So you've got to be aware if you're standing on the flight line and a cycle's just gone through, you might be 4 or 5 minutes before you're catching that next bit of lift. So if you're paying attention, you know whether you have to chase what just went through or is there something else coming through. So very important to understand that tactic throughout the day. The next level of reading the air is the local conditions around you. You need to be continually calculating the Joe Wirtz third vector. How long is the wind shift and what is the direction? There's a bit around on the web already about that. And I've got some thermal training notes that you can refer back to where we talk about that in detail. So watch for air signs, the ground signs, the birds, the streamers, the trees, the grass, all of those factors. You need to be collecting as much information as you can. Watching the previous group's flights will determine what's the last 30 minutes been doing and what am I likely to get in my upcoming flight. So again, knowing this curve and what's happening and how it's affected by clouds, wind, temperature are all really important. So I've listed out there the thermal cycle, the cycle time. The thermals organised or are they broken up? If you watch the great video by Paul Natone, you'll see a lot of thermals are really quite irregular and really don't get going, especially in this early part of the day here. Is the third vector working? It might not be working all the time. There might be multiple thermals on the field. There might be geographical hotspots that are affecting what you're reading. Have you picked the wind shift that happened throughout the day when a change went through halfway through? So there's lots of different things. And then look at the geography, their tree lines, cloud paddocks, what the cloud's doing. If you had a thermal streak that's come through and affected the weather conditions for 10, 15 minutes, even half an hour. So all very valuable things to be looking at. So what this allows you to do is work out predominantly what the cycles are doing, how strong the air is. You're watching other people on the field, other flights before you, and you're starting to see, for instance, that the air's getting stronger. Or at Malang, what we noticed is that the air was very broken up. So it was like a lava lamp. So where you've got lots of different thermals, it's windy, it's sort of rolling along the ground like this. So you might be in a bit of a thermal and you think, oh, great, here we go. You get 2 or 3 turns and then it dies off. And then you're looking again for that air. So that gives you a good indication about how aggressive you're going to be on your flight. So paying attention to other flights that have occurred, not necessarily for what you're going to get, but it gives you an indication about what's been going through. Again, are there 7 people in 7 different thermals? So when you rock up to the field, you've got a good indication that you've got lots of thermals around. Or you've got one big thermal, 7 pilots are all in it. It was 2 or 3 minutes ago. All the other 4 or 5 have all dropped out. You know that it's big cycling conditions. You've got to be careful when the next cycle is.
Marcus, Bill Kent, you're talking about when it's broken up. So you're saying when you can read that the air is broken up because of, say, the 20-kilometre-hour wind and it's turbulent, then you would normally then go higher because you realise you're going to be fighting small bubbles? Yeah,
correct. No, 100%. So it's about assessing the risk in the air at that time of the day. So spot on. Yeah. And you'll also get fingers that will form and die, and then you get a point where at a certain height they'll all sort of come together and form a bit of a thermal. So you've often seen it where someone gets out there early and they're starting to circle, and you think, wow, that's great, and you race over there and you're directly underneath them and you're going, oh no, where the hell's my thermal? And they're just going gangbusters, and you're left behind. And that's often a sign where the thermals, all the little thermals have all sort of come together, and then it's gone, whoa, I'm a big thermal, and off we go. And so being aware of that, you can be careful about chasing thermals that you're not going to be able to get into. So again, it's that observation. And of course, you start a little bit higher. There was a couple of times where my caller said, hey, there's some people getting away over there. I was doing okay, but not real good. And I'm like, no, at this level that I am, I had to stay with the bubble that I had. If I left what I had and went searching for something else, it was going to be a high risk that I missed it. Any other questions? Oh, good. So then that gives you that field size thermal reading. And then in the 5 minutes before launch, this is where it becomes super critical. You've got to now start to look at exactly what the air is that you've got in front of you, because this is the key to F5J. If you can get in the air faster and read the air better than someone else, then that's where the advantage in F5J is. And in particular, that last 5 minutes makes a huge difference how well you're going to read the air. So don't be distracted. If there's people talking to you, walk away. Go out on the flight line early. You'll see that getting out there on the flight line early, looking at what's going on, just you and your caller, that gives you a massive advantage. If you're not prepared, and we'll talk about being prepared later, if you're running around grabbing your battery, if you're trying to figure out which group you're in, if you're going, oh hell, where did I put this? Then you're not paying attention to the air. You rock up to the flight line at the last second, you go, okay, where am I going? And you don't have that mental picture. And so you apply it where, what was happening in the last 30 minutes? Where are you in the cycle? Is there another cycle coming? Has one just gone past? You're continually calculating Joe Wirtz's third vector. Really important. I'm not saying it works every time, but you need to be on the ball understanding what it is. Again, watching all the air signs, the ground signs, and you got to get to that point in that last 20 seconds of where do I think that air is. And like I was saying before, if in doubt, just go to the side that the stream is pointing to. You might go to a previous hotspot. And again here, even if it's very small changes, especially if windy, it becomes about increasing your odds of finding the lift. And those small advantages are often all it takes. So that's when you pull it all together. And this is your A plan. So you've got your overall competition strategy. You know what the conditions for the day are going to be doing. You've been looking at what's happened over the last 30 minutes, and you've been able to read what's happening in the last 5 minutes. And if you can do those 4 things, you'll have a very good mental picture of what the air's doing and what you need to do for your upcoming flight. And then it doesn't become a, oh my God, what are we doing? It becomes a calculated decision that increases your chances of getting into that air as quickly as possible. And so that's what you get out of it. Where you're going to go, how high do you need to be, because you'll have a feel for how strong the air is, and also what's your safety margin. And this is a really important one. If all of a sudden at level 1 in the competition, you've decided that you want to be extremely conservative, then that safety margin might be 50 meters or 100 meters or a full, I'm just going to 200, and away you go. If you're trying to be more aggressive, then you can reduce that safety margin. If you're on a fly-off, your safety margin might be dropped to 0. You might be like, I think it's out there. I think I can get into it from 10 meters. I'm going for it. And so that's why you need all 4 of these decision points to be able to understand what you're doing, not just what's happening at this point in time. Any questions? I'm going to grab some water.
Marcus, it's Paul here.
Yeah, Paul.
Just one comment, on that last 5 minutes. I think that's sort of one of the biggest arguments for flying in teams. When you're having to sort of spend that last 5 minutes trying to scrabble around, trying to find a timer, you've got no chance of actually getting that last 5 minutes preparedness.
It does make a difference. And, for local events or some of our events with no teams, it just comes with the territory, and that's where you've got to be ahead of the game, talking to someone before your flight or 2 flights in advance, warming them up to where they need to be, making sure once you've landed, you're running back, you've got your extra battery ready, your gears on, and you're ready to go. So yeah, the teams make it easier, and absolutely, but there are some ways, when you realise how important that 5 minutes are, you can come up with some clever ways to really maximise that 5 minutes.
Marcus, one of the other things that you need to consider is that some contest directors don't get the idea that you run 5 minutes preparation and 10 minutes flight time. When everyone's on the line, they'll just call it. And so that disrupts that whole process. That's
the next level that me in particular and others are trying to get to, is how can you multitask as much as you can? I find I'm landing from one flight, but I've been taking mental notes about what the cycle's been doing because I know I'm up next. You sort of put it all away in that little memory.
The way that I think about it is, it's more about putting you in a position where you have the highest chance of getting a thermal. And a lot of the time, I think that's what Joe does, is that, he'll observe things like when we were at the Worlds and I was watching him fly, he would go out quite regularly over a brown paddock, which was next to the flying field. And, again, if you think about, well, where have I seen thermals before? What do I know about the topology and the area that I'm flying in? That's often, I think, how he manages to find things. It's when, you know, fields, you know, you can talk to Malang, you know, talk to various fields, and I think the Europeans do exactly the same thing. They have an advantage because they've flown at fields before, and they know that in a particular wind direction that tends to get lift in a you know, similar location. So I think having knowledge of the field, spending time practicing at a field does give you an advantage as well.
Yep, absolutely. All relevant points, and I guess the point of all of this is the more information you can get, then the better off you are. The next part is okay, you've got to the flight line, you've made a determination about where you think the lift is, how strong you think the lift is, and what your safety height's going to be, and that's your A plan. And then your B plan is really what happens on the launch. So in low lift conditions, you might just use time your motor run. You know that 23 seconds is going to get you to 200 meters. In active conditions, you might be racing out fast, flat, and a lot lower than what you think you actually need to be. You can do a search for lift, and then you can blip higher if you don't find it, or go back to your default. So you're looking for an advantage. And in windy conditions, one of the other launch strategies is to actually, so it's very, very windy and there's very low lift conditions, and you can actually race out, get well ahead of the field, and then pull vertical, time how long it takes you to get to the 200 meters, and switch off. And that's a way of getting yourself a lot further forward in the field. So the less down trim you need parked above everybody to make your time versus being out the front, you have less trim, you can come back, theoretically increases your flight time. But the key with any of this is don't get carried away with the moment, and remember your big picture. It's very easy if you've got a conservative strategy and you see 6 other people all thermaling in a low thermal, you can all get excited and go, oh yeah, I'm going to go for this one, and oops, daisy. So staying focused is very important. So I know I struggled with that at the Worlds as well. Andrew did it extremely well, but we were talking conservative, but there were a couple of flights where I had some really good air and I was off and I was into it. So it's about staying focused. So with your low lift condition strategy, you need to know how many seconds it takes to get to 200 meters. Without any lift effect and with a constant system, you can get within plus or minus 5 meters if you time how long it takes to get to 200 meters. So the things that need to go with that is all 4 of your batteries need to be the same age, the same temperature, and also the same internal resistance. And we'll talk about this more in the preparation section. Putting different batteries in that are going to give you different run times aren't going to help you. And measure it in different conditions. Sometimes in windy conditions, you can work out how long it takes you to get to 200 meters with your ballast on. And I actually write it on my plane. On the canopy, I've got, you know, X seconds to 200, X amount of ballast is Y number of seconds. And if it's windy and I've reduced my climb angle, I've got another number. So I rock up to the flight line. I look at the plane. I might have had 3 different motors in 3 different planes, and it reminds me straight away what the plane's capable of doing. And then of course you can calculate, you know, if you know that you only need to be 150 meters high in some beautiful buoyant morning air, then work out what percentage of that time is going to get you at 150 meters or 175 meters. Jerilderie was a classic. You know, we were finding at Jerilderie we could get our 10 minutes from about 160 meters. So I did a couple of early morning flights, worked out that I needed a 16-second motor run. went to 17 just to be conservative, and it worked every time. You know, in that period of the day where it was just pure low lift conditions. So that's another way to try and optimize your height. And knowing your sink rate of your plane helps. But the overriding factor is height means nothing if you can't make your time. Any questions on that one? The next one is for your everyday active conditions. A strategy I like to use is I've worked out where I'm going to go, how high I think I need to be to make sure I get in the thermal, but I might be off a lot lower than that, because you want to be trying to optimize every meter you can, especially if it's a local competition or it's a very active conditions. So I'll launch low and fast out to where I want to go, maybe 5 or 10 seconds. I'll then switch the plane back to just having the prop ticking over and a setting that I know the plane's not going to climb or descend. It'll just hold. And then I'll be looking for that bit of air for 10 to 15 seconds. If I've hit something, I might switch off. If not, I run a more powerful motor than what I need to. You can blip for 5 seconds if you need to, get back up to that predetermined height that you want to be. It's nice and safe, give you a chance to go searching for the air. So you need a more powerful motor than normal for it. Nothing super powerful. I'm just saying, you know, not a motor that, you know, 200 meters in 30 seconds. And know how the plane reacts on launch. So I spent quite a bit of time flying around with my motor on in this low mode, watching what the plane does when it hits lift. So I can be, you know, the tail's going to go up. How much energy does the plane get with that particular motor run? What's the response of the plane? It's no good you hitting a bump and the motor's too powerful and you go, oh yeah, that's beautiful. And it's just the motor power. And then you switch off and you've lost the air. So a bit of practice beforehand. So I'll take my Altus out and make sure I put it back in. And just run around at this low level motor setting and learn what the plane's doing. And the other thing I'll do is number 5 is use a double confirm method. So if I'm flying along and I've hit a bit of lift, especially if I'm under power, I'll be flying out. I go, well, that looks good. I'll get a lift in the whole plane, and I'll think that's great. So then I'll switch off back into my low mode. I mean, not off, but in the low mode, and then I'll do a circle, come back to it. And if I hit it a second time, then I'll be off straight away. So the first one was like, could be lift, could be a bubble. The second one is, hey, I've got 2 hits going on here. I might be straight off with the motor, hold out for the 10 seconds, and then off we go. So you're trying to optimize the minimum height you need for every flight. You can be watching other pilots and change tactic. So you might be 20 seconds into your run and you might see some pilots that have already switched off a couple of 100 meters away, and there's 2 or 3 of them all starting to circle already. Well, you can be straight over, blast over, and join what they're doing. Generally, I don't like to follow other pilots, but I'll use them as a marker. It'll be like, okay, that's my backup plan if this doesn't work. So whenever I talk about other pilots, it's not about following them, it's about using them as extra markers. If you're the only plane in the sky, you've got one marker of what's going on in the sky. If you've got 5 or 6 planes all in different areas, then it's 5 or 6 pieces of information that you've got. And that's how I often think about it. Often one glance across the sky and you can see who's got their tail down or who's not climbing very well versus who's got their tail up and a bit of energy in their turns, or they're climbing a lot faster than what they thought. I mean, we've all done that where we run our motor for 15 seconds and we normally get to 200 meters and we got to 250 and we go, oh, what happened? All that great lift. Well, if you practice it, you can start to see what the difference is in the plane. If you've got a consistent motor run at a consistent angle, for instance, you can see what the differences are, and that'll be the lift. So all these are important practice things, so that when you're at the competition, you're giving yourself more advantages over your competition. My transmitter calls out a 30-second launch window, so it counts up from 0 to 30, and then from the moment I switch off, it then counts another 10 seconds. So again, I've got it in my mind how much time I've got left, how much time can I be mucking around looking for thermals, what's my factor of safety going to be, and I know how high I can get in that last 5-second blip. And again, if it's not working for you, just take that extra height. Height means nothing if you can't make your time.
I will add, Marcus, the 10 seconds after the motor switches off. That's actually more critical than I think a lot of people give it credit for, because everybody, observation, and this was at the Worlds too. Everybody's off and they're immediately into thermaling if they've hit the lift, and that you've really got to fight that tendency to want to pull up, because if you're in quite a strong thermal, I mean, you can put on 30 meters in that time if you pull up hard and really work the thermal. And I think that's something that we don't often think about. And having that count on your transmitter, and pushing the nose of the plane down really can help you there in avoiding those extra meters. So yeah, don't ever underestimate the importance of those 10 seconds afterwards.
Yeah. No, absolutely, very important. Yeah, no, we've all done it. I agree, you can easily put 20, 30 meters on without even realizing. And that's why I've got it on the transmitter. Just I'll pull a little bit of brake. Like you said, just keep the nose down is often all you need to do. And then as soon as that 10 seconds is up, yeah, burn and turn. Interestingly, at the Worlds, they used a technique where when they switched off, they then did horizontal circles because the plane banked up quite high. There were some different theories about, like, you could actually, whether or not you could actually circle for like 12 seconds. So after 10, you had a little bit of energy left, and then you can do a little kick and gain another couple of meters after your 10 seconds runs out.
Yep.
So that's another technique as well, is to keep the nose down and use up your 10 seconds. I must admit, I haven't played with that yet. You had a go at it, Andrew?
I've not really done it either. I was sort of slightly turned off by the guy who was going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and had a tail blow up. So
yeah. Or another one where he was doing it and he went smack straight into another plane.
Yes, I remember that too.
Yeah. So yeah, some creative. There was actually some theories that was actually breaking up the air or causing the air to go turbulent and actually popping off the thermal. was one of the conspiracy theories we heard, along with our rice.
Exactly.
So for those that, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, Phil Kent. So you're saying that you stay in the thermal that you found while you're doing that 10 seconds thermaling, or?
Yeah.
Follow it. Yeah.
So staying, you're coring just like you are, or it doesn't really matter. Just keep in touch with the thermal is the most important point for that 10 seconds. Pull a bit of brake, just keep the nose down, stay in the same spot, but keep in touch with the thermal. The last thing you want to do is spend 10 seconds mucking around and then go, oh, now where's my thermal gone? So that's something to be cautious of. So again, practice is probably the best bet. I personally don't do anything too radical. I'll pull a little bit of brake and try and stay keep my turn as tight as possible so I'm not losing touch with the thermal. Any other questions? If it's windy and low lift conditions, which we can get in Australia early in the morning or late in the afternoon, or during winter we can get it quite a bit, is how do you actually judge 200 metres if you've decided to go boring full bore ahead into the breeze? It's very, very difficult to judge your height if you're a long way away. It's just a natural, poor human perception. So the first thing is, it's very rare that I've gone over 200 metres in Australia, but can work in some very rare conditions. But I think for the majority of the time, just aim to be below 200 metres. Like Andrew said earlier, over 200 metres is just going to kill you 99% of the time. You need a motor to get to 250 metres with full ballast in case you do need it. One tactic is, like I was saying, to race up wind, but reading the height's extremely difficult. I've tried practicing it before the Worlds. I do it once and I think, yep, 200, land, I'm 150. I'll do it again, back it straight, back up again. Yep, that's 200 and I'm 250. So we're talking about being 300, 400, 500 metres out in front of you. So Jimmy actually put me onto this tactic where he knew how long it took him to go vertical after he'd been going horizontal. So for instance, he went 17 seconds flat out at about 20, 30 metres altitude, kept everything in full throttle, pulled vertical and went vertical for 13 seconds and then would pop out the top. And he was getting within 5-10 metres of 200 every single time. And what you realise a couple of times is that by the time you've accelerated and the plane's hit its terminal velocity, that velocity's very constant. So when you pull vertical, you're going to get a very good transition of that energy into pure vertical energy. And the second part of it is that because your wings are vertical, there's very little effect from any lift. And so I've tried that a few times and that works really well in windy conditions. Does that make sense? So we'll get on to some of the thermaling techniques. So you've stood on the flight line, you've assessed what the conditions are doing, you've now completed your launch, and you're into the thermaling phase of your flight. So this low-level thermaling really has to be practiced. And what you'll notice is a lot of the DLG pilots are the ones that are doing very, very well in F5J, purely because of that low-level thermaling skills they've got and that low-level air reading. So most people don't fly hand launch or can't fly hand launch. I actually have had to retire from hand launch, and so I've gone to a Radian. And so I'll now go out to the park with the Radian, launch to 20 to 30 metres. That's the highest I'll ever go, irrespective of the conditions, and off you go. And they are great planes, but they can be dogs. And you learn very quickly what makes them work and what makes them doesn't. But it's a bit like the old baseball analogy. I don't know, I remember seeing an 80s baseball movie and they had like 6 baseball bats and they'd swing those for 5 minutes before they walked out. And then they'd take one baseball bat and they'd then have that extra strength. So this is about practicing with something difficult. And these Radians, they're a lot of fun. Yeah, I was surprised for a bit of foam. I'm hooked. I've got 3 Radians now. So get out there and just practice that low-level stuff. You know, how do you center in the thermal? So the keys are, there's no time for fluffing around. and going searching for where the center might be. If you hit a bit of lift, you've got to start turning straight away. Start your turn. Even if you're going up on only half the turn, it doesn't matter. Just start staying in that spot. And then you can recenter each time. So here's the thermal. You might be circling over here, put on the whiteboard. So this is a scenario where you might have only launched to 20 or 30 meters. And here's your thermal, and it's moving this way. And you've hit the side of the thermal, and you've just started to circle. So here's your plane. Right. And the point is that at least for some of your time, you are in the lift. If you start going out over here and around there and like, where's the center? You spend most of your time out of the thermal. So as soon as you hit it, down low, start thermaling. And then what you can do is you can go, hey, this side of the thermal around here is going better. So you just elongate that turn, and I like to say half a circle, because you want to touch it. If you make this circle too big and the thermal's small, you end up flying around it and then you've lost it. You always want to be touching the thermal. You want to be knowing where it is all the time. It's very easy to lose them at very low altitude. So just do a recenter. How much of my flight now is in the thermal? 3/4 of it. Great. I'll just move again. And within 2 or 3 turns, you've then centered the thermal. That's an important little trick for hanging on to low-level thermals. Any questions? The next part of it is that, like before, often low-level thermals, if now I draw the ground here, and this is the thermal raising up, so this is your height, the thermal might look like this. It might be a blob even. And so you're circling in this one here and you're going up. And then all of a sudden you get to this point here and you've lost it. Often the thermal has repositioned itself relatively close to where you are. So some people I see, they go, oh, damn it, I've lost it. And there's somebody 100 meters over the other side that's going up, and they tear off after someone else. What you'll find with all this low-level practicing is that there's often another piece of the thermal somewhere nearby. And it may not be very consistent. But the thing is, don't give up. Open your turnout to maybe twice the size or 3 times the size of your thermal, and just do a larger circle and check the air around you. Often if you've got your, if you open that, I'll draw a plan view, actually might be a bit easier. Here's one of the thermals, here's the other thermal, here's the other one, and you've been circling here, and all of a sudden this one disappears and it gets pulled into this one. Then just opening out your turn, you'll often touch another piece of the core, or there'll be enough of an indicator on the plane that goes, oh, I just got a little bit of a wing kick there, or my plane's being pulled into another thermal. But just open that turn out and keep looking. If you don't find it here, go out the other side. You'll often find that there's another piece of the thermal nearby. If I haven't found it after 1 or 2 turns, downwind is my default. 90% of the time, the thermal will reform downwind of where it is. So the downwind side of it tends to suck the upwind side of it into itself. So, you know, if I've done one circle, maybe two at the most, I'll then reposition downwind, unless there's any other kind of indicator. But again, like Andrew was saying before, it's about increasing your chances. So open up the circle and try downwind are the two that increase your chance the most. Any questions? So I think I touched on a couple of these here. No time to fluff around finding the centre. If you lose the air, immediately open your turn and search the local area. It often hasn't gone far away, or just reform nearby or downwind. So my decision to leave air, even if it's struggling air, has to be very, very clear. I have to be sure that my air's dying. I have to be sure I can get to other pilots, and I have to be sure that they're actually going up. You know, I've been called a lot of times to other pilots that aren't really going up and they're just circling in sync. So again, you need to learn to have a little glance at what's going on. You can pick up whether the plane's got any energy in it or not. If you look closely enough, you can look for half a second, know whether a plane's in lift or not. If you're looking at the energy of the plane, there's something about the way it looks, the way the tail's up. It'll give you a good indicator that that's worth chasing. So 9 times out of 10, it's better to work with what you have and be patient. Never give up, never surrender, work really hard on what you've got. And you'll learn that from the practice you do in the park. You know, you lose a bit of a thermal and you go, oh, that's no good, I'll go chasing something else. Nothing. The times you actually spend back at that thermal, recentering, trying to find it again, watching the plane signs, that's where you can make it work. And in 5J, you're often low, and you've got to make it work. So once you've sort of worked that low level, then the big picture thermaling technique starts to take over. And these are two very different mentalities. What I was talking about was a strength, the low level stuff was a strength I had, but I was really quite weak looking back on it over the years at the big picture thermaling technique. Most of the F5J pilots have got very good big picture thermaling and need to work on their small stuff. And you know, I've had discussions with pilots over the years and they're like, oh, the air's all the same. Well, there's two different mentalities, I believe, in the small stuff and the big stuff. And where I've really improved is more of the big picture thermaling over the last couple of years. So you've started to get away in your thermal, and what you need to start telling yourself is it won't last, because you want to be working hard. You want to continue to optimize your thermal with every turn. In the wind, is your lift to distance ratio okay? Often a pilot will be like, yeah, go for it. And I'll be like, no, I'm going down too far here for the height that I'm gaining. And so it'll be like, right, I need to find another strategy. If others are climbing in your thermal, you need to constantly reassess whether they're actually going up faster than you. I've had people going, hey, that guy there is higher than you, you know, move left. It's like, no, I'm actually going up faster than him. And within a few turns, you're out thermaling them. So in Malang, there was quite a few times where I was able to get to the top of the pack just from continually optimizing my air. And you know, in the fly-offs, for instance, or a couple where you've got to read that you've got 5 minutes of crap on the way back. So by optimizing that lift, taking it back as far as you can before you've got to turn and come home is a massive advantage over those that have had to turn early because they haven't been climbing efficiently. So you've seen a couple of pilots that have, you know, 7 or 8 pilots are all in the thermal. It's got to a certain distance, 4 or 5 have left and come home, and they're on that death run home where it's like nothing, 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 you know, and they're scraping home, they're going for a walk, they land at 8 minutes. And that's where it can become a big advantage, is you've got to be working hard the whole time, optimizing that air. So while you're in the thermal, you still need to be paying attention to the third vector. What's the air doing around you? Where's it coming through? And often by being on top of the pack and by taking the thermal back, if this is your distance back, and this is you up here, and other pilots have already left and they're on their way back, they're great thermal spotters. You know, the last Malang fly-off event, I had to catch 6 thermals, and all I did was, I was high, I was back further than everyone else, I just assessed the field, left side was going crap, right side was doing better, couple of people circling, boom, that was my go. Flat out, back into them, only got halfway back, for instance, into the next thermal. Whoop, that group on the left's going. Boom, over to them, off we go again. 6 times. I had to move and go looking for different air. You had some similar experiences, Andrew?
Yeah, one thing I was going to add there on the big picture thermaling, I think your comment there about it won't last is actually very, very relevant. I'm always quite paranoid about the thermal falling apart, because the number of times that I've felt really comfortable and everything's been really good, and then all of a sudden I'm on the ground. You know, that happens a lot, and so I'm very, very conscious of that whenever I'm flying. And I think you know, probably the best example of that was at the F3K Worlds last year with Hugh. So Hugh launched, and it was poker, so you have to elect your flight time out of 10 minutes, and he called all in. So he had to fly for 9 minutes 58 seconds basically. Anyway, we got into good lift. We walked off down the field with this thermal, and he was up really, really, really high. We were going downwind, and we walked all the way to the end of the airstrip. And at about 5 minutes to go, we turned around to start coming home. And as you said, we were just coming through crap all the way back, and the plane was plummeting out of the sky. And poor old Hugh landed 2 seconds before the end of the round and got a 0. And that sort of convinced me that if I'm in, you know, any time that's not, you know, very, very clear that I'm going to make it, then my intent is always to try and stay with the thermal, even if that means that I get a bit more uncomfortable because it's further downwind. I will try and stay with it as long as I possibly can, because yeah, the number of times that I've seen it just fall apart, or you're coming back through bad air. The other thing that I think is really important to ask from your caller, and Paul can attest to this because I'm always talking to him about this, is I want my caller to try and find other options for me. Like, I want option B and I want option C, because on my way back, if things do fall apart, I want to know which side should I be heading to. Is there another plane in the air that I can look at and find my way back? So I think having those other options and having your caller looking out for those other options, because, you know, a lot of the time when you're massively downwind, like, you know, it's all you can do to keep your eyes on your own plane, let alone watch anything else. Yeah, I think having those other options is critically important. Probably the only other comment that I'd make there, Marcus, you had on your slide about, you know, leaving the lift that you're in, and I totally agree with that. I think that, you know, 9 times out of 10 when I leave lift that I'm in because I'm trying to get to something that I think is going to be better, seldom does it end up ever actually being better. You know, a lot of the time you really should, you know, work what it is that you've got. The only time that I think, you know, that bit becomes not quite right, is if you are in, you know, dire straits on one side of the field. Let's say you've just launched and, you know, you've basically launched into pus, and your plane is just plummeting out of the sky. I think the thing there is to be able to make a really quick decision to say, right, this is just not going to work. I need to get out of here. And you need to make a very, very clear decision to go somewhere else. And it may be very painful. You know, I can remember a couple of flights at Malang where I launched on the wrong side. I just had a bad read. And I lost, you know, 75% of my height getting out of there. But then at least I was somewhere where I could catch some more lift. And I think making that judgment is a good thing to do, because it's very easy just to flop around there and, you know, and you're on the ground in 4 minutes. And I think I had one flight where I did do that. So yeah, making that, I think when you've got something, sticking with it is really important. But on the other hand, making a quick decision when you're flying in pus is really important as well.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, that's a good point. There's been a couple of times where, again, I was on the wrong side of the field, and you might be 200, 300 meters away, and you're thinking, oh, I really just should, you know, keep going with it. But if you can very quickly make a decision that the side you've chosen is wrong, and there's other people circling, like you said, if you can, even if you lose 75% of your height, there's often some, and I'll draw a picture of it. It was sort of what we drew before, where the thermals. So this is sort of your downwind, and here's your column of air, and there's some planes up here circling in it, and you're totally on the wrong side of the field. Well, often it's not just a column. There'll be air sort of being pulled up into the thermal from near it. There'll be little bits of bubbles that are forming around it. And often you can catch in the tail of a thermal. So you might have some really strong lift up here, but if you've raced, you know, 300, 400, 500 meters across, and it looks like you're totally done, if you can pick up some of these little bits here and then keep repositioning, you know, sometimes they might die and you might have to move downwind and recenter, but you can very often pick up these bits and make your times. So I think that's a very good point, Andrew. Does everyone follow what we're talking about there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks.
Sorry?
The theory's really good. Practice is a whole other ballgame.
It is.
Teacher, James.
Yeah, but the thing that I find is that a lot of pilots are out practicing without really having too much of a plan. You know, there's a lot of sport pilots out there that, you know, and we've all done it, where we're out there and what we think we're doing is really good. So what I'm hoping to do is generate some discussion and get some ideas where you can go, hey, I'm going to go out and try some of that. Or next time you're in a particular situation and you're in a bit of pus, hey, I'll try racing across the other side of the sky. It's a bit of a strategy. And then you're like, oh, wow, you know, might not happen every time, but then you're like, oh, wow, I got away with it. It's something that you've then learned. And that's the whole idea of it.
On practice, I think a lot of the time, and I'm guilty of this as well, you know, it's good to go out and you fly for 10 minutes and land, and you know, you don't have to walk very far. And I think practice sessions are a really good opportunity to push the limits. You know, like you can go further downwind than you can before, and, you know, land in the next paddock, because at the time it doesn't really matter. And I think sometimes, you know, you're better to try and take those risks in a practice session than, you know, for the first time you've ever tried it, you know, doing it in a competition. So yeah, absolutely. When you're out practicing, you know, push the limits a little bit. See how far you can take a thermal. because it's only when you do these things repetitively that, flying, a long way downwind is, becomes a little bit more comfortable. Because even now I find, even in the Milan competition, I was getting pretty uncomfortable when those models were way off. And doing that over and over again and trying new things is, much better to do in a practice session.
Mm. Yeah, no, fantastic.
Marcus, this is really all good stuff. I'm really enjoying this, but a lot of my practice I'll end up even out front of my house with a Radian rather than the contest model. Are you going to be able to still practice those techniques with a Radian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to some degree. You can practice your optimizing your thermals. You can practice chasing after a thermal if you're on the wrong side of the field. In the park, often the thermals aren't very far apart in the park. So even though a Radian not very particularly fast, if you can make those fast decisions and get across to the other side of the field, I think if you can get a lighter 2-meter plane, then you can work those lighter pieces of air a little better. So anyone with a F3 res plane, or get a little bungee and just pop it up 20 meters. The lighter the plane, the easier it is to practice some of these low-level thermal skills. Yeah, always something to do. The even the first 4 strategies about, not your competition one, but obviously assessing what the day is, assessing what's been happening in the last 30 minutes, and then assessing what's happening in the 5 minutes. Like, I force myself on my timer to stand there for a full minute. You know how hard it is to stand there and do and not fly for a full minute and just pay attention to the air. If you're not practiced, a minute's a very difficult time to stand there, but it forces you to concentrate for that longer period of time. Then do it for 2 minutes, and actually practice standing there and reading your backyard or your park, and then go, right, I've got to launch at exactly 2 minutes, because that's what an F5J competition is. You can't choose when you launch. You say, right, in 2 minutes time I'm going to launch, and you spend that 2 minutes taking in all the information, and you'll be amazed how much better you are at picking where the lift is. So yeah, just finishing off the big picture thermaling technique. Take a thermal as far as you can. It means you have markers on the way home. Simple things like, is it right? Is it left? Is it in the middle? Who else is in the air? And again, the point about your caller is your caller's got to be very careful, and I still see this quite a lot, not to call who's the highest, right? It's who's in lift. For instance, at Milan, we had a guy that was coming into land, and he took a circle on his landing approach. All right. And I'm like, there's the lift. That's where I'm coming back to. So I did a race halfway across the field, got in behind where this guy was landing, and it got me the last 2 minutes I needed. So it's about who's in the lift, not who's the highest. It's a very important distinction. And again, the more observant you can be, like that little observation that I just explained then was the difference between me finishing, second or fourth or wherever it is in the competition. These little things that don't seem very significant. I might have been 2 minutes in, and it gave me an extra 8-minute flight just from that one little observation. So they're the keys. There's a fine line in this sport sometimes. And again, sometimes it's just which side's my streamer. I've got no planes coming back. I haven't felt very much. The streamer's just pulled a little bit to the right-hand side. I'm just going to come back down that right-hand side of the field. Might be the difference, just giving me that extra 30 seconds I needed to get back to the spot, or just hang it out that little bit longer, because the air's just that little bit better out that right-hand side of the field. And the last one, which we're talking about before, only leave your thermal when you have a plan. You might have to take 3 thermals on the way back. So be aware how much time there is to go. So I'll be happy to take a run from downwind, pick up a thermal halfway back or 70% of the way back, and thermal it back up again. Come back. I'd rather take 3 thermals being 70 to 100% of the distance I can fly and stay high, rather than try and race all the way back and then try and find something when I'm low. So we'll move on to the preparation side of it. And I personally found this a challenge. It's not my strong point. And flying F3K and F5J, there's not a lot you had to worry about. Charge your battery, pull your hand launch out of the car, go for a fly. Sure, you'd have to look after your winch or your winch battery a bit, but that was pretty much it. But preparation over the last 2 years has been the biggest killer of my events. The last 4 big events that have cost me have all been because my preparation's been poor. It's the #1 reason I've lost most of the F5J competitions I've flown. And it's not because of things that go wrong, it's because it takes my mind off looking for lift. Like we said earlier, that 5 minutes before your launch, that's critical. Or it's not paying attention to the 30 minutes before because I'm mucking around with the plane, or getting a battery ready, or trying to find a battery, or find my checker. So this is the way I look at it, every little preparation mistake gives your competitors an advantage because I'm not paying attention to the air. And so battery not charged, not sure which group I'm up, wrong battery, servo strip, crack fuzz, spinner pushed against the firewall, ESC cut out, ESC wrong voltage set up, the battery died, my new plane wasn't sorted. All these little things in F5K, F5J, they're going to kill you. So batteries, for instance, I'm now running 6 batteries, all of the same brand, all the same size, same age and the same health. So I measure their internal resistance and keep a log. You can buy one from Hobby King, and you can see when that internal resistance is starting to peak. If you've got different batteries, how are you going to know you're at 200 meters is 23 seconds? Everything varies. I throw them all out each year. I've got a 4 output charger and 4 batteries on the flight line. The last thing you want to do is put a battery that's not charged, or you didn't push the start button. I even had 3 at Malang, and I still had a problem where one of them wasn't charged properly because I only took a single output charger. Then I needed my transmitter, and then someone said, "Hey, can I top this battery up?" All kinds of issues. So a battery warmer in the cold months is a good one. So for those cold Jerilderie mornings, your batteries need to be at the same temperature, so you're getting a constant time and a constant height. I've always got a battery checker in my pocket, so even if it comes off the charger and it says it's this, I'm now in a habit of whacking it on the checker before I plug it into the plane, because you'll get the battery and then you put it next to the plane, and then you go and do something and you'll come back and you go, is that the battery I took out, or is that the battery I put in? Whack it in the checker. I've got 2, one in my pocket, one in my, so when I lose one, I've still got one. All these silly things. Make sure you store your batteries at storage voltage. It takes some time, but you really need to do it. And one battery mistake will cost your competition. You don't have it done, set up right, just wasted your whole weekend. Any questions? The power system, I apply the 80% rule. I only run 80% maximum power through the rating of the system. This game's about consistency, not chasing nth degree results. It's a thermal event. If I don't have the ideal setup with the ideal optimum, doesn't matter. I know I can get to 200 meters in 23 seconds, and I know that I can do it with all 4 of my batteries. That's what this is about. You know, I haven't been pumping them too hard. I know my speed controller is not going to crap it in a fly-off when I'm standing on the flight line and I'm trying to run, you know, 60 amps through a 50 amp speedy. And it's all caught up with me after, you know, 6 months of it being perfect. Oh, why did it go crap now? You know, you push the system to, it's like your car. If you're running around in your car, revving the crap out of it, one day it's going to give up on you. So it's about being consistent. So make sure you in your ESC you've set the required voltage, not automatic. I've seen high voltage batteries 3S think it's 4S, and then people wonder why it's hit the low voltage cutout. Set your current to insensitive if you can adjust your ESC setting. Set the lowest possible cutoff, or better still, don't set any cutoff at all. Or have it drop the power, but you don't want it turning off. You don't want to be standing on the flight line in a fly off and 3 seconds in your speed controller says, oh, under voltage, I'm switching off. You want it to at least get you enough for an actual launch. And again, your motor and gearbox. You know, run your setup through eCalc or PropCalc, I think it's called, to check your power setup. You don't need to know a lot, but you do need to make sure that your setup's right. Now, KV, you know, for the first 18 months of flying this electric, no one really explained what KV meant. I got sold one motor, and it was a 3,000 kV motor, and then I ordered another one. They said, oh, here's one, and it was 4,000 kV. All of a sudden, I'm pulling 30% more power through my system, and I burnt my motor out. Okay? So this is the preparation. If you can think of a scenario, I've made the mistake. So I hope people can learn a little bit from this. And it's cost me, you know, good finishes in 4 or 5 big events in Australia. Another one is place a spacer on your motor shaft. So you can put a little 6mm aluminium thin wall tube. You just cut it with a knife to the length you want, slip it on, and then put your spinner on. So if you come in and do a dork landing, you haven't pushed your spinner back against your plane. And again, that cost me. I didn't notice, got out to the next flight. You know, 5 seconds in, the whole thing crapped itself, and you know, went. Lubricating your gearbox every year and perform a 6 monthly maintenance. So I'm sure some other people have got some other maintenance or sad stories, but I'm happy to share them now. If anyone's got anything relevant. I think that's covered plenty. Yeah.